Is boxing even a real sport? How are people with little to no experience beating world championship boxers? We're going to get into it. It's always been a question for the longest. Oh, if this martial artist came into boxing, how would he do? If that martial artist came into boxing, how would he do? The question is a false question right off the bat, because you're asking, is boxing even a real sport? How are people with little to no experience beating championship boxers? People with little to no experience aren't beating championship boxers. You know, we're going to get into the recent boxing champions who have fought martial artists and have lost. You know, we got Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury. We got Ardam Lob versus Malignaggi. We got Anderson Silva versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And it goes on and on and on. You know, there's different types of experience. I think there's a thing where, you know, a lot of these boxing aficionados, you know, they're kind of like boxing snobs. They think that boxing is the only style of fighting. And they think boxing is so much better than other styles of fighting. And if you don't understand, like, if you understand combat, you understand combat. Whether it's boxing, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whether it's wrestling. Yeah, there's proficient and technical skills, but ultimately when it comes to fighting, it's about how big are your balls, how tough are you, do you understand how to deceive your opponent and trick them and set them up. So we'll get into the first one. Malignaggi, world champion boxer, 36-8. He fought Ardam Lob, who was never a world champion in MMA, 14 wins, 15 losses. You know, most notably, Ardam Lob was on The Ultimate Fighter, and he was one of McGregor's like best friends, and that's how he got in the UFC. Ardam Lob and Malignaggi is my boy, by the way. I fuck with Malignaggi heavy, but we still got to get into it. You know what I'm saying? So Malignaggi fought Ardam Lob in bare knuckle boxing, okay? And he lost the fight. Bare knuckle boxing is not like traditional boxing. Yeah, they're throwing hands, but it's a completely different sport. When you take the gloves off, when you take the 12-ounce gloves off, it's a completely different sport. You know, when the knuckles hit the face with no padding, completely different. You know, and it just goes to show with the original question, is boxing even a real sport? Yes, boxing is a sport, but boxing isn't fighting. Now, don't get me wrong. Boxing, out of all the combat arts, is the most dangerous, and I have much respect for boxers. Much respect. I started out with boxing myself. I have much respect for boxers. So many people die in boxing every year. But when we talking about fighting, Ardam Lob was never a champion, never a top 10 fighter, and he went in there and he gave the business to Paulie. You know, why is that? How is that? When Paulie is a champion level boxer, incredible boxer. The thing is, when it comes to bare knuckle boxing, it is a completely different sport. The pace is different. The impact is different. You know, the techniques are different. But you would think that Paulie would be able to piece up someone like Ardam, you know, and that just wasn't the case. You know, it just really wasn't the case. You know, I think the thing with boxers universally is it is the sweet science, okay, when you're in the square circle. And I don't understand why they call it a square circle either. It kind of pisses me off, to be honest, because it's either a square or it's a circle. What the fuck is a square circle? But I digress. When it comes to boxing, they call it the sweet science, and it is a sweet science. When you see someone like Floyd Mayweather doing what he does in there, he's just very technical and proficient, and he just knows every inch of the ring and every way to get away from punches and to land his counters and stuff like that. Now, when we go into Malignaggi also is a technician, a great fighter, you know, great boxer. When we look at Ardam Lob in MMA, Ardam Lob was a dude who just went out there, threw hands, didn't have a ton of crazy techniques or a ton of skills, proficient. Like, you know, when you look at someone like Ardam, or we look at someone like Paulie, or like someone like Floyd, but he goes in there and gives Paulie the business, because a lot of times these boxers underestimate other martial arts, you know. And the first thing you learn in fighting is if you underestimate someone you're gonna fight, the fight's gonna be way, way harder than it needs to be. So that's one way that a championship level boxer got beat by someone who wasn't a championship level boxer, who was quote unquote a beginner. But also Ardam isn't a beginner, you know. He just was fighting and throwing hands in a different way than boxers are used to, you know. I think the main difference is boxers and the boxing community is super arrogant. Super arrogant. They believe that they just are just like kind of boxing snobs. As were MMA fighters, they come in and they have the mass respect for boxers, and they take it very serious. You know, no boxer is going to come into MMA and be able to win a championship or be a championship level fighter. It's just not going to happen, you know. But we've seen multiple MMA guys come over and give the business to championship level boxers. That's just a fact. You know, I know the boxing heads are going to be on here talking shit, the boxing snobs, but that's just a fact. We're going into the next example. Anderson Silva fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and he beat him. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., 34 wins, 2 losses. No, 34 wins, 2 losses by knockout, and 4 losses by decision. Chavez Jr., his dad was a legendary boxer. You know, this day and age, it's a different day and age. When we looked at the 70s, the 80s, all that, there was no real mixed martial arts. There was kickboxers like Benny the Jet, Chuck Norris, stuff like that. But we just really didn't know. So we almost put these boxers on a higher pedestal than they really should have been. Don't get me wrong. What Ali did back in the day, amazing. You know, what George Foreman did back in the day, amazing. What Mike Tyson did, amazing. You know, that can never be touched. Boxing is a real manly sport. Boxing is a real tough man, rough man sport. And you have to be smart in boxing, you know. But someone like Anderson Silva coming in and whooping Anderson Silva, by the way, has 2 wins and 2 losses in boxing. He beat a champion in boxing. Okay, but Anderson Silva has been doing Muay Thai and doing mixed martial arts and training and striking for a long time. He understands striking. He understands range. He understands the fundamentals of fighting. He knows how to set someone up. He knows how to throw a jab. You know what I'm saying? So that's how he goes in there and he whoops Chavez Jr.'s ass. You know? So with the whole premise of the question, how are people with little to no experience coming in? No one with little to no experience is coming in and whooping a boxer's ass, a championship level boxer's ass. It's not happening. You know what I'm saying? The person who asked this question is a boxing snob, you know, and he's pissed off because he's like, how are these guys coming in and whooping the champion's ass? Look, you boxing snobs need to understand that there's a lot more out there than just boxing. There's Muay Thai out there. There's kickboxing. There's jiu-jitsu. There's wrestling. You know what I'm saying? Anderson Silva is coming out there. He whooped Chavez Jr.'s ass. And Chavez Jr. was a champion boxer. Also, another thing with boxing is between boxing and MMA. In MMA, you're going to fight real fighters right off the bat. You're going to fight real fighters right off the bat. In your first fight, you might fight someone who's a world champion in a different style. In MMA, there's very rarely where you're going to have your record built up. You know, out here in California, there's a couple fighters who've had some fake records. You know what I'm saying? I know a dude who was 15-0, right? Fighting bums, the boxing style. As soon as he went in there, he fought someone who was 2-0, who was a real fighter, a real athlete. He got his shit pushed in. He got destroyed. So in boxing, there's too many guys who are going over to Mexico, going over different places, having these fake fights, building up these fake records, and then pretending like they're real dudes. And then maybe they are actually skilled, and they get to a point where they win a championship, and then you think he's the greatest fighter ever because he has this beautiful record. And then you have someone like Anderson Silva come in and just box his head off, you know, or Ardam Lob come in and give someone the business. When Ardam Lob is 14 and 15, 14 wins, 15 losses. Is going in there. But Ardam Lob fought real fighters the whole way through. You know what I'm saying? Ardam Lob, I'm not saying Paulie Malignaggi didn't fight real fighters. He did. But when it comes to putting these boxers on a pedestal, we really need to stop doing that. And a perfect example of that is the most recent example, the most significant example is Francis Ngannou fighting Tyson Fury and whooping his ass. Tyson Fury being the lineal heavyweight world champion, multiple belts, you know, huge guy. Francis Ngannou coming in with 0 boxing fights. Francis Ngannou had no boxing fights at all. And in fact, when you watch Francis Ngannou box in MMA, a lot of people say he has no fundamentals. A lot of people say, how is he even winning these fights? You know what I'm saying? That's what the boxers would say. That's what the boxers would say. When you see Francis Ngannou go in there and starch Rosenthal, you know, when you see him starch him, that knockout where he's just swinging crazy and he knocks him out, Rosenstruck, that's his name, Jairzinho Rosenstruck. When you see him knock him out, the boxing heads would be like, bro, this guy has no technique, right? But then he goes in and he fights Tyson Fury and he drops him, whoops his ass. They rob him on the scorecards. And I would love to see some of you boxing heads come in the comments and say that Francis didn't win that fight. Nobody of a sound mind can watch that fight, Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury, and say that Tyson Fury won that fight. Tyson Fury got destroyed the entire fight. He got dropped, and he was throwing elbows. You know what I'm saying? So now, when you say Francis has no experience boxing, it's just not true. Or he has no experience in a boxing ring, yeah, but boxing really isn't that hard. You know what I'm saying? Let's really get to it. Boxing itself, the sport, is a hard sport. You're gonna go in there. You need to be tough. You can get knocked out. You can die. Yes, but it kind of shows if you have martial arts experience in a lot of fights, you can catch on to boxing pretty quickly. You know, McGregor went in there and you know, he got destroyed by Floyd, but he went in there and went 10 rounds with Floyd Mayweather, the best boxer in history, right? Arguably. So Francis Ngannou going in as a championship level UFC heavyweight champion and going in there and ragdolling Tyson Fury, it says a lot. It really says a lot. It doesn't diminish Tyson Fury's accomplishments. Tyson Fury fought great fighters, but you boxing heads got to understand there's great fighters on this side as well, you know? And, you know, this example I don't really like to bring up, but we got to bring it up. Vitor Belfort versus Evander Holyfield. Now, Evander Holyfield obviously was like 58 years old, 59 years old when he fought Vitor in boxing. So I don't really like this example, but actually, this is a perfect example of what I mean with the boxing snob mentality. Evander Holyfield should have never took that fight, period. He should have never, ever took that fight as a 59-year-old man to fight someone like Vitor Belfort. I don't care if it's boxing. But a lot of boxers really believe that they're just so much better than MMA fighters or kickboxers or whatever. And they believe that these guys suck. You know, so that's why Evander Holyfield really thought that he was going to go in there and whoop Vitor's ass at 59 years old. You know, and it just didn't play out. That, or maybe he needed the money. I don't know. But I've seen so many times where these boxing guys just really, really think their shit don't stink and they can't get knocked out or get pieced up by an MMA fighter. And they really disrespect the level that the MMA fighters are on. A perfect example of this is Andre Ward. He went and he was training with Nick Diaz at one point. And he was shocked with how good Nick Diaz was at boxing because he thought he was just an MMA fighter, you know, sloppy fighter. You know, the days of guys like Tank Abbott and just like the sprawl and brawl style of fighter is gone. You have really, really good skilled boxers in MMA. You know what I'm saying? And boxing itself, the way you box wouldn't work in MMA. I'm saying you have very skilled strikers who know how to throw their hands. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. All you have to understand is range control, setups, and you need to understand how a person's body moves, and you'll be able to box. And you need to be tough, and you'll be able to box. And that's what has been shown. And an example that I hate, you know, I hate this example, I really do. But Jake Paul coming in to boxing and doing what he's doing. Jake Paul is obviously gaming the system, you know, but this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Now, if we have the right MMA fighter, let's say, for example, Jack Della Maddalena. If we bring Jack Della Maddalena in to fight Jake Paul in boxing, Jack is going to probably piece up Jake. He's probably going to piece him up. If we bring Ilya in to fight Jake, Ilya is gonna piece up Jake. You know, but Jake has a beautiful record, right? He has a beautiful record right now, quote unquote. You know, that's the problem with boxing. In MMA, you could never do what Jake is doing. And if you did do it, there would be a point where you get exposed, just like Bo Nickel. You know, in MMA, you get thrust to the top very quickly. Or you might fight somebody who is an Olympic wrestler or an Olympic boxer or Olympic kickboxer or whatever. You might fight somebody who's really, really good, you know, right off the bat. So you can't do what Jake Paul has done in boxing, in MMA. And that's where when we get MMA fighters fighting boxers, championship level boxers, and putting the beat on them, putting the beat down on them, that's ultimately what we're seeing. So many guys in boxing have undefeated records. Now, if you're fighting real competition, there's only going to be a very small amount of people who are undefeated. Because if you're fighting true competition, someone is going to lose. Unless you're really good. And then there can only be so many guys like that. There's only one John Jones. You know what I'm saying? There's only one John Jones. In all the welterweight weight class right now, there's Michael Morales is undefeated. You know, Michael Morales, there's only one guy in that top 10 or two guys who have undefeated records. You know what I'm saying? In MMA, we had Ian Gary, who was undefeated, fight Shavkat, who's undefeated. Boom. One of them's going to lose. In boxing, there's too much skirting around, hiding around, fighting easy competition, and then you never really see who is actually good. And then now they're fighting someone who is competitive, who quote unquote doesn't have boxing experience, but is used to competition and used to fighting real fights. And now you hit a brick wall. And that's what I think it is. That's why you see these guys who have less experience, quote unquote, or no experience, quote unquote, coming in and giving these world champion boxers ass beatings. You know, is boxing even a real sport? Boxing is a sport. Boxing is a sport, but boxing, you know, it was on the pedestal for too long, you know. And boxing is a great sport, don't get me wrong, but it's a sport that you can learn very quickly. And you know what? Actually, let's dive into that, because nobody could come into judo as a white belt and be an Olympic champion level judo fighter. It's not going to happen. Impossible. Not going to happen. So that's a very interesting point, actually. You can't come into jiu-jitsu with no experience. Or no, actually, here's the thing. So the equivalent to MMA fighters coming into boxing and beating up world champion boxers is like an Olympic level wrestler going into jiu-jitsu and giving the jiu-jitsu guy work and even beating him. That's the equivalent, you know? So boxing is a sport. Yes, it is. But there needs to be, you know, there needs to be more respect for the other martial arts and sports out there. That's the thing. It's a sport, but it's not a sport like baseball is a sport. It's a sport, but it's not a sport like hockey is a sport. It's a sport, but it's not a sport like golf is a sport or swimming or some shit. You know what I'm saying? Swimming actually would be a closer example, because if you get someone who's a real athlete and really strong, you know, you could probably get them to beat a lot of really good swimmers. You know, that brings us into the next point. Pro boxer skilled versus BJJ black belt in a street fight. Who's winning? The same level in both of their respective sports. We've seen this happen time and time and time again. The winner would be the jiu-jitsu black belt, more than likely. Just because pro boxers, you're skilled, yes, but if you don't have takedown defense, you're screwed. And as soon as you get to the ground, you're cooked. 9 times out of 10, the BJJ fighter wins. And there's multiple examples of this. We have Randy Couture fighting James Toney. It took no more than 2 minutes or no more than 90 seconds for Randy Couture to wrap up James Toney quickly. You know, James Toney didn't land a punch. The thing is, if you're a skilled BJJ fighter, the boxer's not going to land a punch. You know what I'm saying? You're going to go in there, you're going to take him down quickly. There's so many ways you could take someone down, you know? There's so many ways. And as soon as the fight gets off of the feet, you know, boxing doesn't work from your back. You know what I'm saying? So this question is a question that we see time and time again, striker versus grappler. We've seen it a million times. And usually the grappler wins. Let's say if Khamzat Chimaev had no boxing and he fought Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder's going to get destroyed by Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev's going to run out there, take him down, put him in a chokehold quick. It's over with. You know? So, back to the original question of, is boxing a real sport? Yes, boxing is a real sport. But you know, we're too many people put boxing on a pedestal and don't realize, you know, the world champion boxer is not the best fighter in the world. He's the best boxer in the world. And there's many people who will give him them hands. If you take someone like Ardam from Glory Kickboxing, and you take him and you put him up against someone like Usyk, yeah, Usyk could probably beat him. But Ardam would do a lot better than a lot of people would think they would. You take someone like Alex Pereira and you have him fight Deontay Wilder in boxing, I guarantee there's a good chance Alex Pereira knocks out Deontay Wilder. It could go either way. But we need to stop putting these boxers on a pedestal like they can't get their ass beat. Anyone can get their ass beat. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we see guys coming over in MMA and from MMA whooping up on boxers, you know, learn to fight.